the phantom melody. The chandelier crystals scattered prisms across the dining room of Lumiere, the most anticipated restaurant opening in the city this season. Nora Winters adjusted her emerald cocktail dress and surveyed the room with practiced nonchalance. At 32, she had mastered the art of appearing comfortably at home in spaces designed to intimidate. As the youngest executive producer at Zenith Records, she had earned her seat among the industry elite. "To Nora's latest Grammy nomination," said Dominic, raising his glass. Her colleagues from the label nodded appreciatively. "Third time's the charm." She smiled, allowing herself a moment of pride. The album she had produced for indie sensation Fiona West had been a career-defining gamble, blending orchestral arrangements with electronic soundscapes. Critics had called it revolutionary. "I couldn't have done it without this team," she replied, though they all knew it had been primarily her vision. A server approached their table, moving with a quiet grace that seemed at odds with the bustling restaurant. "Good evening. My name is Vincent, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Something in his voice, a certain cadence perhaps, made Nora look up from her menu. The man was tall with olive skin and dark eyes framed by wire-rimmed glasses. His black hair was pulled back neatly, and his expression remained professionally neutral as he described the evening's specials. For a fleeting moment, Nora felt a strange resonance, like hearing a familiar chord progression in an otherwise unknown song. But the sensation passed as quickly as it had come, and she dismissed it as déjà vu. "I'll have the seared scallops," she told him, "and another glass of the Chablis." Vincent nodded, his pen moving across his notepad. "Excellent choice," he said, and then he was gone, disappearing into the orchestrated chaos of the restaurant floor. As dinner progressed, Nora found her attention repeatedly drawn to their server. There was something in the deliberate way he moved, the careful precision of his actions. It reminded her of a pianist she once knew, someone who approached even the simplest task with mindfulness. "Earth to Nora," Dominic laughed, waving a hand before her face. "Where did you go?" "Sorry," she said. "Just thinking about the mastering session tomorrow." But it wasn't work occupying her thoughts. It was the strange feeling that she had encountered something familiar in a place she'd never been. When Vincent returned with their dessert menus, he placed Nora's down with a peculiar care. As she opened it, she noticed something written on the inside in elegant script. "The second movement was always your favorite." Nora blinked, confused. "I'm sorry, there seems to be something written here," she told Vincent, showing him the menu. His expression didn't change. "My apologies. That menu must have been used for a special event. I'll bring you a clean one." When he returned with a fresh menu, Nora studied his face more carefully. There was something about the shape of his eyes, the slight asymmetry of his smile. "Have we met before?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could stop herself. Vincent hesitated just long enough for Nora to notice. "I don't believe so. Ms. Winters." The fact that he knew her name without an introduction wasn't unusual. She was recognizable in music circles, but something in his tone made her wonder. As they left the restaurant, Nora glanced back. Vincent was clearing their table, his movements as measured and precise as a metronome. For a moment she thought she saw him pause, his fingers hovering above the glass she had used, as though it contained more than just the remnants of wine. The night air was cool against her skin as she stepped outside, but the unsettled feeling remained. Something about Vincent had stirred a memory she couldn't quite place, like a melody half-remembered from a dream. Dissonant memories. Vincent Reyes stood in the kitchen of Lumiere, his hands perfectly steady as he arranged delicate chocolate tuiles on a dessert plate. Around him, the kitchen symphony played on, chefs calling orders, pans sizzling, plates clinking. But Vincent moved with a deliberate calm that seemed to exist outside the frenetic energy. "Table 7's check, Reyes," called the head server. Vincent nodded, tucking the leather folio under his arm. As he pushed through the swinging doors, his eyes immediately found her, Nora Winters, laughing at something her colleague had said, her head tilted back slightly, exposing the elegant line of her throat. She laughed exactly as she had 8 years ago, with her whole body unrestrained. He approached their table with practiced professionalism, placing the check discreetly beside Dominic. "Thank you for dining with us tonight. It's been a pleasure serving you." Nora glanced up, that same curious look in her eyes that had appeared when she'd asked if they'd met before. Vincent maintained his composure, though his heart hammered against his ribs. How could she not remember? They had spent 3 years together at Westridge Conservatory of Music. 3 years of shared practice rooms and midnight compositions. 3 years where his cello had accompanied her piano in duets that had once made their instructors whisper about their potential. Vincent returned to the kitchen, leaning against the cool tile wall and closing his eyes. The memories came unbidden. Nora at 22, her fingers flying across the piano keys in their final recital together, her face illuminated with passion. They had performed Rachmaninoff's cello sonata in G minor, and the standing ovation had lasted nearly 5 minutes. 2 weeks later, she had told him about the internship at Zenith Records. Its production, "Vince, not performance," she had explained, her eyes bright with excitement. "I'd be learning from Julian Mercer himself." But what about Juilliard? "We've been planning the graduate program together for years." Nora had looked at him with a mixture of pity and impatience. That was before this opportunity. "Don't you see? This is my chance to actually make it in the industry. By giving up performing, that's all you've ever wanted. Things change. People change." She had reached for his hand. "Come with me. You could teach cello, perform in session orchestras, while you climb the corporate ladder at Zenith." The words had come out harsher than he'd intended. Her face had hardened then. "I didn't realize you were so traditional, Vincent. I thought you'd support my dreams." "I do. I just thought I was part of them." The argument that followed had been their first and last. Words like ambitious and uncompromising from her, principled and idealistic from him. They had both been right, and they had both been wrong. 2 days later, she had left for Los Angeles without saying goodbye. Vincent had received his Juilliard acceptance letter the same day. He never went. A month later, his father had suffered a devastating stroke. Vincent had deferred his admission to care for him, playing cello in restaurant lobbies at night to help with medical bills. By the time his father passed away a year later, Juilliard was a distant dream, and Nora was already making waves at Zenith. Vincent had followed her career from afar. The rapid ascent from assistant to associate producer, the first Grammy nomination. The profiles in music magazines that described her as relentless and visionary. Not once did any of those articles mention her past as a pianist. "Reyes, your 8-top is seated," called the maitre d', pulling Vincent from his memories. As he worked through the evening, Vincent kept finding reasons to pass by Nora's table. Each time, he noticed something different. The thin silver bracelet she still wore on her left wrist, a gift from him for their 2nd anniversary. The way she still tapped her fingers in rhythm when she was thinking. The slight furrow between her brows that appeared when she was concentrating. She didn't recognize him, and why would she? The Vincent she had known had been a promising cellist with long hair and passionate opinions about Rostropovich's interpretations of Bach. This Vincent, the one who had spent the last 8 years caring for his father, working service jobs and playing in community orchestras, was a stranger to her. When her party finally rose to leave, Vincent watched from across the room. Nora lingered behind her colleagues, glancing back as if searching for something. Their eyes met briefly across the crowded restaurant, and Vincent felt the years collapse between them. In that moment, he made a decision. Quickly, he scribbled on his notepad, tore off the page, and folded it carefully. As he cleared their table minutes later, he slipped the note under her forgotten scarf. The note contained just 8 notes. Written on a hastily drawn staff, the opening phrase of the second movement of Rachmaninoff's cello sonata in G minor, their piece, her favorite. Some memories didn't need words to be awakened. Unexpected cadence. Nora discovered the note the following morning when she reached for her scarf before heading to the studio. The folded paper fell to her apartment floor, revealing the musical notation inside. Her breath caught as her fingers automatically positioned themselves, muscle memory taking over as she airplayed those 8 notes. The Rachmaninoff. Second movement. Vincent's favorite passage to play, and the piece they had performed at their final recital together. Vincent, she whispered, the name feeling foreign and familiar all at once. How had she not recognized him? The realization hit her with stunning force. The waiter from Lumiere was Vincent Reyes, her former musical partner, roommate, and the man she had once believed she would spend her life with. She sat heavily on her bed, the scarf forgotten beside her. 8 years had transformed them both. Vincent's long, expressive hair was now cropped short, his frame leaner, his exuberant energy contained behind a professional mask. But his eyes. How had she missed those eyes? The same dark intensity, the same careful observation. Nora was late to the studio for the first time in her career. "Sorry," she mumbled to Fiona West, who was already in the booth. Something unexpected came up. "Must have been important," Fiona remarked. "You're never late." Important. Was that the right word for encountering a ghost from your past? For realizing that someone who had once known every detail of your life was now a stranger serving you dinner? The session progressed mechanically, Nora's mind elsewhere as they worked through the final mix adjustments. At one point, Fiona stopped mid-take. "What's wrong with you today? You're completely distracted." Nora shook her head. "Sorry. Let's take it from the bridge." But the question lingered. What was wrong with her? She had worked relentlessly for the life she now had, the corner office at Zenith, the respect of her colleagues, the freedom to shape music that millions would hear. She had left behind the uncertainty of performance for the power of production. She had made the right choice. Hadn't she? After the session, Nora found herself driving to Lumiere instead of home. The restaurant was just opening for dinner service. When she arrived, the early evening light filtering through the tall windows. The hostess greeted her with a professional smile. "Do you have a reservation, Ms. Winters?" "No, Nora hesitated. "Is Vincent Reyes working tonight?" The hostess checked her tablet. "He'll be in at 6. Would you like to leave a message?" "I'll wait," Nora decided, taking a seat at the bar. She ordered a glass of wine and tried to compose what she would say. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" seemed accusatory. "I'm sorry I didn't recognize you," felt insufficient. "I've thought about you more often than I'd like to admit," was too honest. At precisely 6, Vincent walked through the staff entrance, adjusting his tie. He froze when he saw her at the bar. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, 8 years of silence hanging between them. Then Vincent approached, stopping a professional distance away. "Hello, Nora." "You should have said something," she said quietly. Would it have mattered? The directness of his question caught her off guard. "Of course it would have mattered. We were—" She stopped, unsure how to define what they had been. "Partners," Vincent supplied. "Musical partners." More than that. A small, sad smile crossed his face. "I wasn't sure you remembered." "The Rachmaninoff gave you away," she said, touching her purse where she had tucked the note. "Though I should have recognized you immediately." "I'm sorry I didn't." Vincent glanced at his watch. "My shift starts in 5 minutes. Can we talk? After your shift, or tomorrow, or—" Nora stopped herself, hearing the desperation in her voice. She didn't do desperate. She was Nora Winters, executive producer. She didn't chase after people. But this wasn't just anyone. This was Vincent. "I get off at midnight," he said after a pause. "There's a diner around the corner. Murphy's. They serve breakfast all night." "Midnight," Nora repeated. She had an early meeting with the label executives tomorrow, but suddenly that seemed insignificant. "I'll be there." Vincent nodded, then hesitated. "Why did you come back, Nora?" She considered lying, considered giving him some casual explanation about curiosity or closure. Instead, she told him the truth. "Because when I heard those 8 notes, In my head this morning, I realized I hadn't really listened to music, truly listened, in years. Something flickered in Vincent's eyes, a recognition that cut through their years apart. Then he straightened his shoulders and returned to his professional demeanor. "Enjoy your evening, Ms. Winters," he said, loud enough for others to hear. Then, more quietly, "Midnight." As he walked away, Nora felt as though she had just agreed to something more significant than a late-night conversation. She had agreed to face the road not taken, to acknowledge the parts of herself she had carefully packed away 8 years ago. She was not entirely sure she was ready. Harmonic Tension's Murphy's Diner glowed with fluorescent warmth against the midnight darkness. Inside, vinyl booths lined the windows, and the air smelled of coffee and grilled onions. It was nearly empty, save for a couple of cab drivers hunched over mugs at the counter. Nora arrived 5 minutes early, choosing a booth in the corner. She had gone home after leaving Lumiere, changing from her work clothes into jeans and a sweater. She had also, without fully examining her motivations, removed her makeup and let her hair fall loose around her shoulders, reverting to the way she had looked during their conservatory days. Vincent arrived precisely at midnight, still in his work clothes but with his tie loosened and collar unbuttoned. He slid into the booth across from her, his movements careful and contained. For a moment, neither spoke. A waitress appeared, coffee pot in hand. "2 coffees," Vincent said without asking Nora. "And an order of blueberry pancakes to share?" The question hung between them. Did he remember correctly? Did she still love the midnight pancakes they used to share after late practice sessions? Nora nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "With extra syrup." "Some things don't change," Vincent observed as the waitress walked away. "And some things do," Nora replied. "I hardly recognized you last night. The glasses are new. Dad's eyes. Turns out it was genetic." "I'm sorry about your father," Nora said. News of Mr. Reyes's stroke and subsequent death had reached her years ago through mutual acquaintances. "He was always kind to me. He asked about you, even toward the end." The implication was clear. Vincent's father had continued to care about her welfare even after she had left. The unspoken question hung between them. Why hadn't she reached out? "I should have called," Nora admitted, "after I heard about his stroke. I didn't know what to say." "You could have said anything, or nothing. You could have just been there." The waitress returned with their coffee and pancakes, providing a momentary reprieve from the tension. They both reached for the syrup simultaneously, their fingers brushing. Nora pulled back as if burned. "So," she said, stirring her coffee unnecessarily. "Lumiere. That's unexpected." Vincent's expression tightened slightly. "We can't all be Grammy-nominated producers. That's not what I meant, isn't it?" He cut into the pancakes with deliberate precision. "You're wondering why I'm serving tables instead of playing with the Philharmonic." "You were brilliant, Vincent. The most talented cellist in our class. And you were the most talented pianist. Yet here we are, you in the control room, me in the service industry. Life takes unexpected turns." Nora leaned forward. "What happened with Juilliard?" "You were accepted." Vincent was quiet for a long moment. "Dad's medical bills happened. 24-hour care happened. Reality happened. You never told me. You never asked." His voice was soft, without accusation, which somehow made it worse. "You were building your career at Zenith. Your first assistant producer credit was that same year, wasn't it? On the James Reed album?" The fact that he knew, that he had followed her career while she had lost track of him entirely, filled Nora with shame. "I tried calling you," she said. "Once, about a year after I left. Your number was disconnected. We moved to a smaller apartment after Dad's stroke. Had to cut expenses." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the weight of choices made and paths not taken settling around them. "Do you still play?" Nora finally asked. Vincent nodded. "Community orchestra on Sundays. Chamber music group on Wednesdays. Nothing prestigious, but it keeps my fingers nimble." He glanced up at her. "And you?" Nora looked down at her hands. Producer's hands now, more accustomed to turning knobs on a mixing board than coaxing emotion from piano keys. "Not really. Not for years." "That's a shame." Vincent said, and Nora heard genuine regret in his voice. You had a gift. I found a different gift. Production is creative too, Vincent. I'm still making music, just from a different angle. I've heard your work. It's impressive. He hesitated. But sometimes when I listen to your productions, I hear these moments, these little spaces in the arrangements, and I can almost hear where your piano would have fit perfectly. The observation struck Nora silent. He was right. She often left subtle spaces in her arrangements, gaps that her inner ear always filled with piano, lines she never articulated to anyone else. I don't regret my choice, she said finally. I never expected you to. Vincent pushed the last bite of pancakes toward her. We were young. We wanted different things, did we? Nora challenged. Or did we just convince ourselves we did because it was easier than fighting for what we actually wanted? Vincent's eyes met hers, startled by her directness. What did you actually want, Nora? The question hung between them, dangerous in its simplicity. What had she wanted? Career success, certainly. Recognition, absolutely. But there had been other dreams, too. Dreams of performing, of creating music with her own hands, of building a life with someone who understood her completely. I wanted everything, she admitted. The career and the music and... She stopped herself before saying, and you. Vincent nodded slowly. I wanted everything too, just a different version of everything. He glanced at his watch. It's late. We both have work tomorrow. As they prepared to leave, Vincent reached into his pocket and placed a small card on the table. Wednesday nights. Chamber music at St. Mark's Church on 11th Street? We could use a pianist. Nora stared at the card. I haven't performed in 8 years. Some things are like riding a bicycle. Vincent stood, leaving money for their meal. No pressure, just an invitation. As they walked out into the night, the city humming around them, Nora felt a strange sense of standing on a threshold. Behind her lay the certainty of the life she had built. Ahead lay an unknown path, a return to something she had abandoned. Good night, Nora, Vincent said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared history. Good night, she replied, watching as he walked away, his silhouette familiar and strange all at once. She clutched the chamber music card in her hand, feeling the sharp edges against her palm. She didn't know if she would go. She didn't know what it would mean if she did. But for the first time in years, Nora Winters found herself longing for the feel of piano keys beneath her fingers. Reprise Wednesday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of October evening that felt borrowed from summer. Nora sat in her car outside St. Mark's Church, watching as musicians filed in carrying instrument cases. A violinist in professional attire, likely coming straight from an office job. An elderly man carefully cradling a viola. A teenage girl with a flute case decorated with stickers. The chamber music card Vincent had given her lay on the passenger seat. Nora had carried it with her for 3 days, taking it out during meetings, studying it during coffee breaks, sleeping with it on her nightstand as though it might whisper guidance in the night. She had spent the past days oscillating between certainty and doubt. One moment she knew she would attend, even going so far as to practice scales on the electric keyboard that had gathered dust in her apartment. The next moment she convinced herself it would be better to leave the past undisturbed. But now she was here, her fingers tapping an invisible Chopin etude against the steering wheel. Inside her purse, her phone buzzed. A text from Dominic. Where are you? The Warfield meeting got moved up to 7. Nora stared at the message. The Warfield project was significant, a legacy artist planning a comeback album. Being named lead producer would be another rung on her already impressive career ladder. She looked back at the church where warm light spilled from stained glass windows. She imagined Vincent inside, tuning his cello, perhaps glancing occasionally at the door. With sudden clarity, Nora realized she was tired of climbing ladders. Tired of producing other people's music without making any of her own. Tired of being Nora Winters' executive producer instead of just Nora, who once played Rachmaninoff with her whole heart. She texted Dominic, "Can't make it." Something more important came up. "Brief me tomorrow." Before she could second-guess herself, Nora grabbed her purse and walked toward the church entrance. Inside, the nave had been transformed. Chairs arranged in a semicircle faced music stands illuminated by small reading lights. About 15 musicians were warming up, creating that peculiar cacophony that somehow holds the promise of harmony. Vincent stood near the altar, discussing something with an older woman who appeared to be the group's leader. He wore casual clothes, jeans and a blue button-down that reminded Nora of the shirt he'd worn to their first real date. A concert in the park where they'd split a bottle of cheap wine and discussed Yo-Yo Ma's interpretation of the Bach suites until midnight. He looked up as she entered, his conversation faltering mid-sentence. The surprise on his face gave way to something else, a tentative hope that made Nora's heart constrict. She walked toward him, suddenly aware that she hadn't touched a piano in a public setting for nearly a decade. "I'm probably very rusty," she said by way of greeting. "We all are," Vincent replied, a smile warming his features. "That's why we practice." The group leader, who introduced herself as Eleanor, welcomed Nora enthusiastically. "Vincent mentioned you might join us. We've been without a proper pianist for months, making do with synthesized backing tracks for the piano parts." "I can't promise I'll be any better than your backing tracks," Nora warned. "Nonsense," Eleanor said. "Vincent tells me you were headed for Juilliard before the music industry stole you away." Nora glanced at Vincent, surprised that he had spoken about her to his chamber group. "That was a long time ago." "Music has a long memory," Eleanor replied, guiding Nora to a baby grand piano positioned in the center of the semicircle. "We're working on the Schubert Piano Quintet in a major tonight, the Trout. Do you know it?" Nora nodded. The Trout Quintet had been a favorite of her piano professor, who had made her practice the challenging fourth movement repeatedly during her junior year. As she settled at the piano, adjusting the bench and testing the action of the keys, Nora felt a curious sensation, like returning to a childhood home, both intimately familiar and strangely new. The keys felt right beneath her fingers in a way that the knobs and faders of a mixing board never quite had. The group began with scales and warm-ups, giving Nora time to reacquaint herself with the instrument. By the time they turned to the Schubert, she felt something awakening inside her, a musical instinct long dormant but not forgotten. They played through the first movement tentatively, finding their way through the passages. Nora made mistakes, her fingers occasionally stumbling over runs that she once would have executed flawlessly. But there were moments, too. Perfect, crystalline moments, when everything aligned, and the music flowed through them as a single entity. During one such moment, Nora glanced up from her sheet music and found Vincent watching her, his bow moving across the cello strings with the same passionate precision she remembered. Their eyes met, and suddenly they were back in the practice rooms of the conservatory, two young musicians discovering the joy of creating something beautiful together. The evening passed in a blur of music and conversation. The group was welcoming, lacking the cutthroat competitiveness of the conservatory or the commercial pressures of the recording industry. They played because they loved it, finding time in their varied lives, teaching, accounting, medicine, service, to come together around a shared passion. As they packed up their instruments at the end of the night, Vincent approached the piano. "You played beautifully," he said. "I was mediocre at best," Nora laughed, but without bitterness. "Out of practice. But it felt good, better than I remembered." "Will you come back next week?" The question contained multitudes. Will you return to the piano? Will you make space in your carefully constructed life for this? Will you find your way back to the music and to me? Nora closed the piano lid gently. "I have a major project starting at Zenith. The Warfield Comeback album." Vincent nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "Congratulations. That sounds important." "It is," she agreed. "But I think I can make Wednesday evenings work." The smile that spread across Vincent's face made her breath catch. It was the same smile she had fallen in love with a decade ago, unguarded, genuine, reaching all the way to his eyes. Outside the church, they lingered on the steps, neither quite ready to part. "There's a coffee shop around the corner," Vincent suggested. "Still open for another hour." Nora checked her watch. It was already past 10. "I have an early meeting tomorrow." "Of course," Vincent nodded, understanding. "Another time, perhaps." As he turned to leave, Nora reached for his arm. "Vincent, I was thinking about what you said at the diner, about hearing spaces in my productions where my piano would have fit. He waited, patient as always. I'm working on a project of my own, just something personal. Piano compositions, nothing commercial. She hesitated. They need cello parts. Vincent's expression softened. I know a cellist who might be interested. He any good? He's a bit rusty, Vincent admitted. But he practices. They stood in the gentle October night, the years between them not erased but somehow bridged. They were not the same people who had parted ways at the conservatory. Life had shaped them in different ways, given them different strengths, different scars. But the core of what had connected them, their shared language of music, their understanding of each other's artistic souls, remained intact. Sunday afternoon? Nora suggested. My place. I have a keyboard, not a proper piano, but Sunday works, Vincent said. I'll bring the good cello, not the restaurant gig one. As they finally parted ways, Nora felt a sense of possibility unfurling within her. She was not giving up the life she had built, the career she had worked for, the success she had earned. But perhaps she was making room for something she had left behind too hastily. Perhaps there was a way to have not everything, but the right things. In the distance, a street musician played saxophone, the notes floating up to meet the stars, a melody finding its way home.